Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 88. We skipped past 87, Jack. We skipped past 87, the dreaded 87, 13 from 100, without a mention of it. And we've skipped straight on to 88, episode 88.
Which is very lucky, 88.
Two fat ladies in the bingo call.
In Hong Kong, it's very lucky.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's also, I shouldn't say this, but it's also a reference that Nazis make. Hitler is, the H is the eighth letter of the alphabet, so 88 sometimes comes up in some of the Nazi correspondence. But that's not us, because we're here to discuss all matters Australian politics and media, and then move on and have a good look at what's going on around the world. And joining me, as usual, he's already piped up, is Hong Kong Jack. How are things for you in Hong Kong, mate? Are you befuddled by technology?
Yes, I am. No, not really, but I am a bit resistant to some of the new technology, as a man, as befitting a man my age.
I have a washing machine and dryer downstairs. It's the same unit, and it completely confounds me. I really don't know how to use it and often bugger it up.
Well, our washing machine has about 150 settings, and I think my wife and I use the same one all the time.
I think that's the way to go. This is a sort of, sometimes you can dry only, but I have no idea how. Sometimes you can wash only and then hang things out if they can't go through a spin cycle or through the dryer. But I have no idea how to do that either. Yeah, there are things out there. As I told listeners a few weeks ago, I bought a new car. It's a RAV hybrid, and I'm still working out various buttons and things like that. So it locks automatically, locks all the doors automatic. And when someone wants to get out, I've only just figured out where the unlock button is. So we've had people desperately trying to get out of the car and not being able to. But, getting there. And because it's a hybrid, it's silent when it's in idle. And so I clambered out of the car the other day and I couldn't get the door to lock and I hadn't turned the engine on. So all these things, Jack, yes, they take a little while to get used to.
I certainly don't want a fridge that talks to me.
I don't want a fridge with a screen on it. I never understood that. I mean, there are lengths of technology that are completely and utterly useless, and one of those is internet hooked up fridges. I think that was an idea that really shouldn't have got beyond the blueprint stage. And the idea that you were going to order your food on the internet and then have it delivered and all this sort of stuff. I mean, give me a break. Just go to get down to the shops with a list. So I'm a bit like you, Jack. The other thing that bothers me, and I don't want to sound like Larry David here, but packaging, plastic packaging, Jack. When you get something that arrives in the mail or you bought something in a shop and it comes in that sort of sealed hard plastic and you simply can't get into it at all. You really need a very, very sharp stencil knife or you're not going to get into it. You can tear away at it forever. It was the basis of a Larry David episode on Curb Your Enthusiasm. But, I get confounded by packaging.
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
Same.
So, there are things out there that
I keep the box cutters. I keep the box cutter handy,
Yeah. If you don't have a box cutter with a lot of these plastic wrapped goods, you're not getting into it. Or a good pair of scissors.
Yeah. What about the stuff that has the seal hidden away inside? So you have to take the cap off before you can find out how to get the herbs or whatever out of the jar. That it's
and sometimes yes, there's no peeling that back. If you haven't got fingernails, you can't do it. Or you have to, brutally attack it with a knife. The other thing that I wanted to mention is in the UK, Jack, when you buy a bottle of soft drink or indeed a bottle of water and you twist the top off, the UK make it so you can't So the top remains part of. You can't actually take it all the way off. So the top gets flipped to one side. It's actually quite clever in terms of. It takes some getting used to because I just didn't. I kept tearing away at it, but they do that obviously to reduce litter.
Yeah, so the tops just don't get thrown away separately.
Yeah. So no one explained this to me, so I'm tearing away at the bottle to try and get the top off, but that's not the way it works in the UK. Quite a clever idea, and I finally figured it out. The Greens, Jack, have actually gone a little bit crazy over the last couple of weeks, particularly in relation to housing. They're voting with the coalition in the Senate to basically create a double dissolution trigger for the government in regard to its housing policy. And it is saying that as one of the negotiables is that the government should intervene with the Australian Reserve Bank and force an interest rate rise. Jack, is that even possible?
Interest rate cut. I believe it is possible.
Interest rate cut, yes.
I believe it is possible, but it's just not something that's used. I mean, we could go back to the government setting interest rates if we wanted to, but I just don't think that's a really good plan.
No, it's not. You need to have a statutory authority that is independent of government who makes these decisions. Otherwise, you're going to have a politicised monetary policy. You
will. One of the things that's amused me about the Greens is they are constantly complaining that the government won't negotiate with us. Adam Bant's constantly on about this. And we don't really understand negotiations. Part of negotiations is someone standing up and walking out of the room and saying, the deal on the table is, look, our last proposal is the last proposal. You can like it or lump it. That's a negotiating tactic.
But the Greens seem to be quite comfortable lumping it, Jack.
They do.
And that means you don't really get anywhere.
No.
And particularly around housing. I mean, they've gone for ideas like rent freezes and things like that are, when you contemplate them, when you sort of try and figure out how that will work through the system, they're completely counter to their objectives. And this one seems to be even worse. We've got Jim Chalmers on that, who said, every time that there's an interest rate decision, for example, the Greens in their usual way will say that the Parliament should override the decision. And that's a difference of opinion. Nick McKim, the Greens economic spokesperson, he's drawn the short straw there, hasn't he? Or they wouldn't have too many economists among their lot. He says his party won't support the Albanese government's RBA reforms unless or until interest rates fall. Given the central bank governor, Michelle Bullock, has repeatedly said a cut to its cash rate is unlikely in the near term, that means this year, Chalmers must use his existing powers to make it happen. That's what the Greens believe. So the Reserve Bank, let's talk more broadly. Let's move beyond the Greens. So the RBA, as an independent body, has said that an interest rate drop is unlikely this year, well, in the short term, means, to me at least, this year.
Till Christmas,
now, politically, where does that leave the Labor government, Jack?
Well, I
think they're desperate for an interest rate drop, aren't they?
Yeah, but they are. They want some good news, but they've got some time. They're just going to have to suck this up and get through it. That's not their biggest problem. That's a problem, but it's not their biggest problem. Their biggest problem is that they look a bit rudderless.
A bit rudderless. I was talking about this with friends last night. A little bit shy, a little bit. There's no narrative. There's no overarching narrative about what they're about. And that, generally speaking, comes from the Prime Minister. And they seem to be timid, Jack.
They're timid and reactive. They seem to be jumping at shadows. Yeah, if some event happens, they've got to run around and talk about it all the time, and they don't really have to do that. They should be on the front. They should be on the front foot, setting some kind of agenda. They don't seem to know what that agenda is.
Let me ask you a quick question. Who do you think is the best performer in the government? Is it Chalmers?
No, I don't think it's Chalmers. I mean, the best performer in the government, the bloke who can stick to a message best, is probably Tony Burke. I mean, Chris Bowen's going from bad to woeful. Chalmers is good, but I think Burke's a bloke who if someone could give him a message that would work, he could go out and sell it.
I think Burke, he's just almost taking himself out of the game. He's just got so many ministerial responsibilities now that you cannot simply ask of him to be a major communicator for the government. No. I tend to think that Chalmers, and this is again in discussions last night with people who are very interested in politics, see that their view is that Chalmers will lead the Labor Party at some point after the next election. And that he will become Prime Minister rather than Treasurer. I'm not as critical of Bowen. I think had some good results this week in terms of where Australia's renewables are. It's a good early start, put it that way, and he'll have to deal with whether he's the right person or not. He is, whether that's arguable, but he will have to deal with the coalition's nuclear policy, which again is very vague, no costings, and we'll get the costings in due course. So maybe Bowen's not the right person to be driving that. But again, we're looking at a Prime Minister he's almost AWOL, Jack.
Yes, yeah, he's not driving the government at all.
Yeah, that's what it seems like, and it just seems to me that either he steps up or he won't go much further. I mean, we were sort of wondering, where all of this sort of timidity comes from in terms of, this is a member of the New South Wales left, Jack. They're normally up and about. They're always making plenty of noise. But Albo seems, and perhaps it's because of his experience in the Parliament in the Howard years. It may also, the terrible crises around the Rudd-Gillard years as well may have forged his kind of approach. But yeah, it's timid and reluctant and reactive.
It's a truism in politics that you never really know how people's going to go in a job like that until they start.
Yeah, it just seems like he's uncomfortable in creating this kind of narrative, and it should have happened more than a year ago. And I know Dan Andrews might not be the most popular politician in Victoria, and having just come from Melbourne, that's certainly the case. But what Andrews did was say, this is where we are, this is where we need to get to, and this is what we're going to do to get there. And then when he gets to re-election stage, he says, now this is what we've done, this is what we set out as our objectives, and this is what we're going to do in the future, and this is how we're going to get there again. And these things are pretty, he was as good a communicator at that level than anyone I've seen.
It's a little bit different being a state leader to a Prime Minister, but that's true. He was, he as a communicator and as a set a clear direction Premier, he was in the Neville Wran, the Bob Carr, that sort of class.
I think there are
top quality. Jeff Kennett the same way. You mightn't have agreed with which way he was going, but he set a clear direction and went.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think there are two very good politicians in this country at the moment. I do rate Chalmers, and I'm not including him in the two, but Peter Malinowskis is the South Australian Premier and Chris Minns is the New South Wales Premier. They seem to have that capacity to be able to, one, explain a narrative, and two, have their finger on the pulse enough to know which way to go in various issues that arise. Let's say social media and youth, for example, where Malinowskis and Minns have been quite outspoken. So they know which way the electorate is thinking. They have a good instincts for that.
That's not a description you would apply to the Prime Minister.
No, it's not, and there wouldn't be many on the front bench, or indeed on the opposition benches. You would say the same thing about.
Mm.
All right.
Chalmers has got some skill, and we'll get to the reason why later. I just think he's taking Australia in the wrong direction.
Oh, well, we'll talk about that in a moment. All right. Now, before we do that, we've got to acknowledge the words of former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr, who did not mince his words when attacking the ABC, with the ex-politician taking aim at the public broadcaster over its now notorious documentary about the fatal ghost train fire at Sydney's Luna Park in 1979. This is a subject after my own heart, Jack. I watched it and mouth agape with some of the nonsense that went on there. Part of the allegations were that Neville Wran had contrived with Abe Saffron a land deal around Luna Park. And obviously the assertion is that Saffron needed that fire in order to remove Luna Park and turn it into flats and light commercial and all this sort of stuff. Now, the first thing you would need to know about this is that when you look across from Milson's Point, or at Milson's Point, Luna Park's still there. There are no apartments no apartment blocks in the Luna Park precinct. It's still there and operating. The idea that Rand, who was a wealthy man in his own right, would sit down on a weekly basis with Abe Saffron is just bizarre. This came from a claim of a woman who had worked as Saffron's assistant. Abe Saffron, of course, is deceased. There are a number of media organisations that tried to finger Saffron over the ghost train fire. The SMH did it after Saffron's death, Jack, and they named a fellow who was an associate of Saffron's, known as the Torch, and said that he was the one responsible. Well, that cost him 50 large because the Torch promptly turned up with his passport and said, well, it couldn't have been me. I was in, I think he was in Eastern Europe at the time and had all the passport stamps to show it. So they quickly moved away from that. And when it came to the ABC documentary, they skirted around that idea with this vague insinuation that bikies had started the fire. What we know from that ghost train doco, and I've spoken to a number of people who've seen it and gone, that's amazing. I said, look, it's pretty much all bullshit. So some people who said, there were a number of people who came forward under interview and said they could smell accelerant in the ghost train at the time. Now, there might be a good explanation for that, and I'll give it to you in a minute. There was another person who said he did not smell accelerant, and, of course, his interview and his statement in that relation didn't make it to air. The idea that there would be accelerant there, the structure itself was made of essentially bitumen. The roof was bitumen, so there's your petrochemicals. Also, the illuminated walls, the paintings on the walls, that's another petrochemical there. I read the original coroner's report, and when you did that, you thought, gee whiz, this was a disaster waiting to happen. There were ghost train cars that had blocked the emergency exits, or there were two emergency exits. One of them was blocked by unused cars. There was frequently rubbish all over the place. They maintained that no one would smoke on the ghost train because there was a no smoking sign. I mean, give me a break. And in 1979, if you will. And almost certainly it started from a discarded cigarette, an accidental fire. What's disgraceful about it most is that the documentary gave false hope to the grieving, and they're still grieving after all this time, parents and associates of those who died there, including, I think, 5 children. What I can tell you about that, Jack, is, and I'm happy to say this, is the maker of that documentary, it went over budget, it was seriously late to be broadcast, and let's just say she's not doing documentaries for the ABC anymore.
Bob Carr finished off with this comment, which I think it gets to the heart of the problem with the ABC. Why wasn't there an editor at the ABC who looked at the program before it went to air and said, hang on, you can't say that without presenting the contrary view? Yeah. I would have dropped without presenting the contrary view. I would have said, you can't say that. And as always with the ABC, there's never, ever an acknowledgement that they got it wrong.
I was chatting to a colleague at the Australian about this because the documentary is now streaming on Netflix. And my understanding was that it was not to be sold on, but it would appear. I may be wrong about that, but my understanding was that it was so controversial that it was not to be sold on to other broadcasters or streamers, but it in fact has been. It should contain various warnings. That's the way it should. I haven't seen the streamed version. I saw the original ABC one, but it should come with various warnings. All I can tell you is the person who made that documentary did not make it. And there's a fairly long list of questionable stuff she was involved with. Your point's well made. There was no one around to say, and as I said, there were problems. There were budgetary problems. My understanding was it went about $1 million over budget, and it was late. But still, there should be an editorial process where it is reviewed, and I'm sure that did take place. Having done a little bit of work for the ABC on a rather dismal podcast, I found myself in a Zoom meeting, Jack, with people who were assessing the material on the basis of its what we might call inclusion, whether there are enough women in it, whether enough, were there enough people of different ethnicities around, and it's very hard to do this around the fine cotton ring, and that seemed to be the big issue, rather than looking at the material and saying, how's this going to stand up if it was basically reviewed in court as part of defamation proceedings?
Yeah. Sadly, ringing in racehorses is generally a male pursuit.
It's a male pursuit. I mean, they went, we've got a woman. There was a woman involved in this. Fantastic. So off they put her in the centre rather than on the periphery where she belonged.
Hayden Haitana would sort of qualify as a person of colour, wouldn't
he? Yes, he would. He would. But yeah, the ghost train stuff. If you watch it, folks, look at it analytically, and I'd recommend you do look at it analytically and say what's missing here. What's missing here? And what you said is the contrary view. So I've given you an example of there was a small group of people who could smell accelerant. Now, we sort of explained why that might be the case. But then there was a person who was asked whether he smelled. He was there, present, one of the ghost train workers, and he didn't smell accelerant. But that didn't make it to air. So that's, you're not making a documentary, you're making a polemic. And
again, when they do get something wrong, no one ever says, look, we might have made some errors in that, and this is what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen the next time. Yeah. No one ever does that at the ABC.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've taken steps to make sure this doesn't happen next time, but in terms of the personnel involved. But there's been no public acknowledgement, and there should have been. And I would also say that the version that is streamed on Netflix should contain a number of warnings. All right.
I'm not sure it should be going out, to be quite honest.
Well, my memory was that was the arrangement, because a number of people were highly critical of it. I think there was a grouping involved that included the SMH editor at the time, Milton Coburn, Malcolm Turnbull, a number of journalists at the Australian, including myself, who looked at this and went, you've, put two and two together and come up with 173. All right.
There were a large number of people who knew Malcolm Turnbull, who knew Neville ran very well, who were just horrified this went to air because they just knew it wasn't true.
Look, Nifty played his politics pretty hard.
Yes, he did.
It's just absolutely absurd. The idea that he would sit down for a drink in a public place with Abe Saffron every Friday, like clockwork. Break. And the other thing is, let's have a look at what Abe Saffron's career was like. I mean, yes, there was sly grogging. Yes, there was prostitution. But when Abe Saffron died, the SMH ran with stories. You'd think he was, Genghis Khan. And really, he was a sly grogger who started during World War II when GIs came to Sydney and the politicians were up in arms, terribly worried, terribly anxious about what was going to happen. The GIs needed things to do. So there was an open acknowledgement with Saffron, who pretty much owned the Cross at the time through the Roosevelt Club, and all the strip was pretty much owned by him. And that the police would look the other way. There would be arrangements made between police. And so sly grogging, prostitution, strip clubs, eventually.
Casinos.
Yeah, casinos, these sorts. Even things down to sort of amusement parlours, sort of pinball machine places and things like that was something that he provided. He was not a perfect fellow by a long way, but by a long stretch, but he was not this incredible monster that he was painted out to be. All right. The backlog of asylum cases, Jack, I've got a couple of suggestions on this. I wrote a little bit of stuff about this around some of the Albanian crime groups and how they get into the country. But we have an enormous backlog. According to The Age, there are 170,500 people living in Australia waiting on a decision whether they can stay or have to go. And the figure is increasing by approximately 1,000 people every month. So they're not dealing with a backlog, and then they've got new numbers coming through the door. So it leaves, and this is an area of your expertise, Jack. How do we fix this problem?
How do we fix it? The first thing you do is sort of counterintuitive, which is to deal with the most recent cases, most recent applications first.
Right.
Because the reason for a lot of the applications is, in fact, the delay itself. So people will apply for asylum if they know it's going to take 5, 6, 7, 8 years to resolve.
Yes.
They know they're not going to win because their claim is completely without merit, but they'll make that claim so that they can take advantage of the long delay. So you take that incentive off the table by saying, if you apply tomorrow, we're going to make a decision, by Cup Week, and you've got right of review, and that will be dealt with by Christmas. And once that happens, you will stop what the department calls the non-meritorious applications.
This is actually something supported by the Refugee Council, Jack.
Yeah. Because this is really bad for everybody involved. It's bad for the government, and it's and even the
bad for the applicants.
Yeah, bad for the applicants. Bad
for genuine applicants, I should say.
Yeah, it's terrible for the genuine applicants because they're waiting for years and years and years for what, in many cases, would be a straightforward decision. And this has always happened to some extent, but once the delay gets well up into the years, it encourages more and more applications.
Now, we talked about this on the podcast and actually wrote about it on Friday in relation to sort of criminal environment, the organised criminal environment in Sydney, and we mentioned Albanian crime gangs. Often they will come to the country with false documentation. There's one case that I can think of where a fellow was holding a fake Greek passport, arrived in Australian ports by air and claimed protection, claimed asylum. And this process would mean that obviously they would be assessed by the Immigration Department, and there may be hearings along the way, Jack. Would that be right?
At the Immigration Department, there's sometimes interviews. They become hearings when they go to the AAT. Yeah.
Okay. And then if the applicant gets a gets a deportation order, there is a process of review through the Administrative Affairs Tribunal where there are hearings.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm seeing from this particular group, the Albanian, and they are sort of crime gangs, is that they won't attend interviews. They won't attend as applicants through the AAT, or they'll miss scheduled hearings.
Yes.
So isn't that easy to fix? You say if you've missed two without a genuine excuse, see you later.
I actually made some decisions this way, which a lot of my colleagues in the law did not agree with. My view of that is, if you have to turn up to get a parking fine overturned, you have to turn up to get asylum. And what the test is, do you have a well-founded persecution for one of 5 reasons, right? If you return to your own country. And what the department and the tribunals do is spend a lot of time testing whether the fear of persecution is well-founded. Is there enough evidence from that country that backs up that the fear is well-founded? But the first step should be, is there actually a fear of persecution? Is there a genuine fear of persecution? And if you won't turn up to a hearing, I'm sorry, I don't think you've got a genuine fear of persecution.
Right. Okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. But clearly the failure to appear in many cases is designed to extend the process.
It is.
And so why don't we have a rule that says if you fail to turn up to a scheduled hearing, let's say more than once without a genuine excuse, that's it. Yes. You can legislate around that, can't you? Surely.
You can. It's probably easier to legislate it than try and put a bit of spine in the decision makers to get it right. But that's what should happen. And then you're dealing with a case in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But what happens now is the tribunal member or the government decision maker is left with a nonsense claim with no support for it, and then we'll spend a day or 2 days writing up reasons why the fear isn't well-founded, rather than just saying there is no fear, case over.
So just to remind, we're not having a go at genuine applicants. Indeed, the Refugee Council of Australia has said that people having to wait up to 8 years to process and review asylum claim are creating an incentive for unmeritorious applications. That's what the Refugee Council says. The Council's submission to government's migration review says asylum seekers face delays of more than 2 years, up to 8, more than 2 years for the Home Affairs Department to assess a claim, and there is a backlog of 38,000 cases, or 6 years' worth, in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal if they seek a review. You've made one suggestion on how to fix that up. Deal with the new ones first, but we also need to say, listen, if you don't turn up without a genuine excuse to have your matter heard, you've got to go.
Mm.
I don't think too many Australians would disagree with that.
I don't think they would. I mean, there are quite a few people. There'll be a few federal court judges who wouldn't agree with it, and that will be something that would have to be worked through. But yeah, I think we've got to be practical about it.
It's hardly a denial of natural justice if you don't turn up to your own application without a genuine excuse. People might have medical issues, etc. But if you just don't turn up because you want to extend the process, and this is how. This is how, and I wrote about this last Friday, this is how organised criminal syndicates are getting into the country.
Because
and they know they'll be deported ultimately, but it might take 5, 6, maybe even 8 years before they get their deportation order.
Yeah, because they're smart enough to game the system.
They're smart enough to game the system. They're also being assisted by immigration lawyers and migration agents, telling them what to do, how to extend the process.
Yes.
Things there that we can fix fairly easily, I would have thought, Jack, and I think you would agree. Misinformation. Jack, what are we going to do about misinformation? The government is now...
Make a mess of it. Make a mess of it is my tip.
I don't like this stuff at all. I mean, I hate disinformation, misinformation, disinformation. There is a difference between the two. Misinformation is, generally speaking, the distinction is misinformation would be, let's say, without a particular motivation, the publication of something that is that is not true. And disinformation is it's designed falsehoods to make people feel one thing or another. Michelle Rowland thinks the misinfo bill has gone out for public consultation, and she thinks that she can carefully balance the public interest, is the quote, in combating seriously harmful misinformation and disinformation with the freedom of expression that is so fundamental to democracy. Sounds like $5 bob each way to me. And Frank Brennan actually wrote about this in the Ozjack, and he points out. He says that he wrote basically misinformation is inaccurate information. I just said that, and he is saying that the government is using very obvious examples of disinformation, and they're not always obvious. That's the point I think I would make. Yeah. I mean, the government at the moment is invested in looking at social media and placing restraints upon them around children accessing social media. I did see some polling during the week that about 60% of Australians support a restriction or restraint on children under the age of 16 joining social media. I think that's problematic. I think it's easier said than done. And then you've got this misinfo and disinfo bill. I mean, I'm all for attacking the social media platforms, very, very wealthy and powerful people running around owning these things, but I don't see where we're going to go. I just don't see that this is a particular role for government, whether it's youth and social media, because I just don't think it'll work. I don't think the restraints will work. And then how we determine what is disinformation as opposed to misinformation. What is the deliberate attempt to basically mislead people?
Well, as Frank Brennan turns out, the government proposal extends this even to information that could be out there, say, during an election campaign or a referendum. And if you're going to have ACMA decide what's information or disinformation, it's going to be the High Court judges who are going to be deciding the election in a sense, because they will be deciding what happens. This will go straight to court. Yeah. So you'll have an election campaign, and the reporters will be parked outside the High Court building in Canberra because they'll be there every day.
Yeah. It could get as silly as that. Yeah, I think there should be pressure placed on governments. Should be placing pressure on social media platforms to have resources to identify this material themselves and provide warnings. It should also attempt to restrict access to children under the age of, let's say, 16, and leave it at that. I just don't think this is a role for government, Jack.
Almost certainly, if the government gets involved, they'll make the situation worse, is my view.
Well, they will, but when you look at the polling, they will see this as a potential asset for them.
Oh, yes, I understand they'll think the politics are good, but that doesn't mean the decisions are going to be good.
No, exactly right. All right.
I mean, generally speaking, good policy is good politics, but not always.
Yeah. Look, if something is unworkable, if legislation is unworkable, there's no point having it.
We see what happens then is it becomes bad politics because you promise to make things better and you make them worse.
All right. Israel and Lebanon, Jack. Pretty ugly scenes coming from southern Lebanon, including Beirut. Airstrikes, missile strikes, etc. And we've got a great many Lebanese people getting out of the Bekaa Valley and leaving Beirut as well. But let's deal with what appears to be, we talked about this in our last episode, the explosive pages and walkie-talkies, Jack. And what we have seen from leaked Hezbollah intelligence documents is that 879 Hezbollah terrorists died, 291 senior commanders died, 509 were blinded, 1735 injured in reproductive organs, you're allowed to go ouch now. 613 permanent function damage, Jack. That has been a very successful campaign. Can I just ask, Jack, why didn't they do this in the first place? Mossad in Gaza.
The gossip is, but I don't think they had the capacity in Gaza. I think the gossip is that this took some time to put together, and that they were not intending to use it now, but there was concern that this might have been discovered and people could have gotten rid of the pages or whatever. So they moved before that could happen.
Right.
But that's some of this is sort of murky. But there's always gossip and innuendo from intelligence agencies. But that's what seems to be the belief at the moment.
Look, we've obviously got Hezbollah firing rockets into northern Israel, and that's been going on for a very, very long time. Multiple launches every year, most of whom get knocked over by the
Iron Dome. Almost daily since October 7 last year.
So what's the response from some countries in the Middle East? What's the response of the Egyptians? What's the response of the Jordanese, Saudis to what is clearly an expansion of the war?
Not much.
I haven't heard much. To be honest, I hadn't been looking, but I just wondered what you'd come across.
No, nothing. Nothing of any note.
Are they just holding their fire, or the Saudis would have very, very little time for Hezbollah?
Yeah, I mean, and no more time for Hamas. You know, what the Western media doesn't always seem to understand is that most of the Arab world is utterly opposed to Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran.
That's right. So the ceasefire, the prospect of a ceasefire seems to have gone out the window. It might have been something the Democrats would have looked forward to during the presidential election, but that seems now to have just completely gone off the table. Yes,
I would have thought so. And people have different views about this, and I completely respect that. And the Saudis have been pushing for a ceasefire. In fact, I think that they were partially responsible for the last Biden suggestion. But it's hard to see that getting up now at the moment.
It's there for Democrats, not, women. Terrorist issues, there are wide-ranging geopolitical issues. The Democrats who perhaps had held out of a ceasefire deal would get one.
Saw some footage from the United States last night of what I can only describe as a pro-Hezbollah demonstration. So everyone seems to have retired their Palestinian flags, and they're now waving Lebanese flags. And
Lebanese flags, yeah. Hezbollah flag. Hezbollah flag. Doesn't it have an AK-47 on it?
Yeah, it does. Just got to say, Jack, we should be in the flag business. There is... Every time there's a demonstration, they've got to go out and buy a whole new set of flags. There's got to be money in this.
I would imagine they're all fairly made in China and fairly combustible as well. Yes. A fair amount of polyester in there. Yes, well, there you go. The flag sales are going through the roof. Now, the United States, Jack, I think we're not being especially revelatory here when we say that the race is tight. This looks so close. We were talking about it again with friends last night, US election watchers, to a man and woman, and this looks incredibly close.
Yeah. I mean, it's in terms of the actual polling at the moment, it's tight basically, and really it depends how close the polls are. If they were, as I think Nate Silver put it, if the polls miss like they did in 2020, Trump wins. If they miss like they did in
2020 or 2016?
2020 and 2022 are the two most recent times. So if the polls are as accurate as they were in 2020, Harris could win all of the battleground states. And if they're as accurate as they were in 2020, Trump could win all of the battleground states. But that's how tight it is.
So just to remind our listeners that the battleground states are in alphabetical order: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, I mentioned Michigan, and they're all within 2 points in the polling. North Carolina might be, well, we'll get to that in a moment, but that might be turning blue just because of the gubernatorial candidate that Trump endorsed, essentially being sent to Coventry. And the Republican GOP, or the GOP candidate for governor of North Carolina, that might put that as a potential gain for the Democrats.
It's a bit hard to know what effect they'll have. And he was an outstanding candidate. He's Martin Luther King on steroids.
Oh, my God. Yeah, we'll get to him in a minute. But, so North Carolina really, it's always been a battleground state for the last few years. I think Obama won it in 2008, may have lost it in 2012 from memory. But it's been fairly, it's been a GOP hold through the Trump years. North Carolina would make it a lot easier if, for example, the Democrats lost Georgia, which I think is going to be incredibly tough. And Pennsylvania, that's probably the critical state, isn't it? I think if Pennsylvania stays blue, and it will be tight, and it will be the count will take a long time. That's what I'm going to suggest. Is it'll take a number of days. But if Pennsylvania stays blue, I think they should get home. But that's a big if.
Yeah, too tight to call.
Yeah, it is at the moment. Tim Waltz, Jack. Well, we've got the vice presidential debate, which should be worth looking at just from a point of view of a bit of cabaret, a bit of political cabaret. Tim Waltz faces off against J.D. Vance, I think, on the 3rd of October, and that will be worth watching. Will have zero impact on the election unless something really bizarre happens, but still should be pretty damn funny. Tim Waltz's strategy says we can't afford 4 more years of this. So, and that's a bit of a statement that Kamala's made as well. We're not going back; we're going forward.
Yeah, and I think that she was on the telly again last night saying the same thing. Yeah. And I read this as a change of strategy. Joe Biden's only strategy seemed to be that he wasn't Trump, and Harris has improved upon that, saying, not only am I not Trump, but I'm not Joe Biden either.
Well, what it does, I think, is just remind Americans just how chaotic certainly the last year of Trump's presidency was. That was through a pandemic, but we could go back a little bit further, and there's some of the foreign affairs bungles and things like that. And it's just a reminder, yes, that every day was kind of like, oh, my God, what's going to happen next? And I think that's quite an effective campaign strategy. They really do. Kamala Harris really does need to distance herself from the Biden administration, which is extremely difficult. But I think that's probably the best way to go about it. We're not going back.
It's worked up to the point that, unlike Biden, she's in a tie. I don't think Biden was ever going to get to be a tie. But whether it will be enough to win the presidency, who knows?
Well, we did say we'd talk about Mark Robinson, not the Herald Sun journalist, but the North Carolina Lieutenant Governor who's running for governor in North Carolina. He was he claims it's all been made up, but it's fairly clear that it was him. It was linked to an email account that is his. He made comments on a pornographic website called Nude Africa. Who comments on pornography, Jack? Firstly, watching porn and then making comments. The comments were bizarre, by the way. Do you
think they're two quite distinct things?
Not sure why anyone would spend the time. He said that he would like to own slaves and that he pined for the days of slavery. And referred to himself as a black Nazi. So his campaign, he was supposed. Trump was in North Carolina when this first came out, this sex scandal. CNN were the ones who uncovered it. And And Robertson was supposed to be with Trump, but then Robertson was nowhere to be seen at the Trump rally in North Carolina, the Trump rallies in North Carolina. And it would seem that Robertson's now been sent to Coventry, and I'd suggest now that, he cannot win the gubernatorial vote.
Well, I think he was already, even before this came out, he was already 5 points down, so he probably wasn't going to win, but now he's got no prospect at all.
Yeah.
In fact, he's lost all of his staff.
Yeah, they were gone on the first day of the scandal.
Yeah.
And there are a couple who come from Washington who are saying that we'll run the campaign from here, and some of them are multiple felons, Jack. So it's all looking very nasty, and it would give, I think it's 16, isn't it? 16 electoral college votes in North Carolina. It might well deliver that to the Democrats.
Whether this is going to deliver it, I kind of doubt it. But we'll
it's
see how
good,
it goes.
Jack. You couldn't say it's they'll be sitting there in the Trump campaign office going, well, this is going beautifully in North Carolina.
No, I wouldn't think they'd be doing that, but I don't think it's going to be fatal in North Carolina. Well, I doubt it, put it that way.
All right, yes, he's not Martin Luther King on steroids. Better, I think Trump said, better than Martin Luther King Jr. Yes. And in fact, Martin Luther King Jr. Came forward and gave Trump a bit of a slapping about those references as well. Martin Luther King, the great Martin Luther King's son. Nuclear energy, Jack. Of course, in Australia, the coalition put forward. I don't even know why they made an announcement. It didn't contain anything, Jack. But that aside. This is in the US now. Constellation Energy, the owner of the shuttered 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania, has said it will invest about $1.6 billion to revive one of the plant's units, which it plans to open in 2028. Yeah, you wouldn't want to live next door to that.
Yeah, but it's been reopened because Microsoft want power for AI, and AI is an incredible burner of electricity, the use of artificial intelligence, because it requires a lot of data and a lot of servers to make it work. And it's still
waiting to hear what the benefits are of AI, by the way, Jack.
I'll I hear about
blokes anyway. I don't see a lot of value.
I hear about them quite a lot because in
the legal business, apparently they knock out a contract.
Yeah,
but read first.
Read
that first.
Well, the way that works is it's kind of like having your junior lawyers do some work for you, but you still got to check it yourself, right? But it's not going to change the world, but it's going to change the way we work in a lot of different areas.
Yeah.
But it does require a lot of power. And that means the demand for power is going to keep increasing. And at the moment, the demand for power is increasing faster than renewables are growing. So the idea that we can replace fossil fuels doesn't seem to be a real prospect to me.
I don't know. I think two matters and tying them together. But what we do know is that energy emissions increased 2%. In 2023 to exceed 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So it's going up, not down. Clean energy is still not even meeting the entirety of demand growth. That was said by Nick Waith, who's the chief executive of the London-based Energy Institute. Arguably, the transition has not even started. So fossil fuel use accelerated in high-growth countries such as India, but there are signs demand had reached a peak in Europe, the US, and other advanced economies. So there are adjustments being made all over the place. The report, which was published on Thursday, said global primary energy use climbed 2%, as I said before. Excuse me. Fossil fuels share in the energy mix dipped only slightly by 0.4 percentage points to 81.5%. Its proportion was 86% in 1995. So it's incremental, the savings that we've got there on fossil fuels. It's not burning fossil fuels. This is going to take a long time to work through the system. All I can tell you is, Jack, with their beautiful electric cars in London, the air's breathable, where perhaps when you were there, Jack, it might have been a little bit hard to take. So there are other benefits to renewables beyond just reducing CO2 emission.
Yeah, well, that's why China, in the cities in China, that they had electric scooters for a long time. It really wasn't about saving the planet from climate change. It was about saving the people from dying now from polluted air.
Yeah. I actually looked at the London stats, and they've had a fairly dramatic reduction of deaths related to respiratory illness.
Yeah. This will drive. It's already driving it in China, and it will drive it in India as well. I'm told the air in Delhi is incredibly
It becomes a public
bad.
health issue.
Yeah, that's right. And it has been a public health issue in China for some time, and people sort of rave about the electric scooters and cars in China, but the demand for those and the need for them has really been driven by a present public health scare, not a future one.
All right, we've got to move on very, very quickly here, but Keir Starmer, the honeymoon is over. His popularity is down 26 points. These things are always going to happen, Jack. What goes up must come down.
And he's been getting they had their annual conference this week of the UK Labor Party.
That's right.
And it should have been a triumph, and it wasn't. It was a disaster. There's just been they can't walk from the chair to the bar without tripping over their feet at the moment. Mistake after mistake after mistake. A lot of it's that they can't respond. He's been pinged for having his suits and glasses and his wife's dresses paid for during the campaign and prior to that, and he's been getting a lot of
ridiculous
freebies.
Stuff. That is, though, ridiculous stuff.
I don't think people care about that. But you need to be able to respond to it properly, and he's hopeless at it, and his ministers aren't good at it either. So it looks like a shambles at the moment already. Which
I think he was also criticised for turning up to the, I think it was the Arsenal-Man City game, and he was criticised for turning up there, just being in the crowd. And you think, well, if the bloke can't watch a bit of sport, then without copping criticism, then maybe certainly the English media, the red tops in particular, will suggest he goes and lives in a hole in the ground and just emerges to release a bit of policy. I mean, a lot of this stuff is nickel and dime mainstream media.
And you should be able to go straight on the front foot and say, look, yes, I have been invited to the football and the races, and I've gone along and I chat to people and I meet people, and that's a good thing. That's all you've got to say.
Yeah, that's all you've got to say. Yeah, look,
but he can't do that.
Just coming from London, where he would be supported, people see him as a rather earnest, workaday type politician, and they believe that he's kind of the right man. They don't really want some charismatic leader like Tony Blair, for example. They want someone who's prepared to just work hard, and he seems to be ticking those boxes at the moment. But his polling would suggest otherwise. Long way to go there. They've got 4.5 years in power before we're going to worry about that.
Well, given the majority he won, and he's got a 5-year term, he should have been looking at 10 years of government. But the way he's going at the moment,
and probably still is. It's just part of the problem with winning by landslide is that it increases expectation.
Yeah, but it was a different sort of election. His support was a mile wide and an inch deep because they won with very few votes. They won a huge majority with very few votes. In fact, if you add the Tory and the UK Reform votes together, they would have won comfortably. And that's the risk for him, is that if the other side of politics mends their fences and gets back together again, he might just get one term, unless he turns things around.
All right. Well, this is an important business, Jack. There's a study being released by the University of Cambridge that's recommended that the traditional British pint, more often than not seen it in the bars of Sydney and Melbourne these days, bars and pubs of Sydney and Melbourne, be abandoned in favour of the 2/3 measure. If I may Australianise, folks, we have middies, that's the New South Wales term, and Queensland. we have schooners, and more often than not, we have pints. And they're saying that the University of Cambridge is saying that if you went with a 2/3 measure of a pint,
which is about a schooner.
It is about a schooner, yeah, that's right. And it would basically reduce the impact of a lot of alcohol-related harm.
Yes. What I want to know is, how do you get funding to do a study like this?
Well, what I want to know is, how did they do the study? They just hit the pub. We better move on. We've got a lot to get through still, Jack.
I can just imagine the chap doing the study. It's Friday afternoon. His wife says, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm off to work on the study."
Off to do the study. I can think of quite a few people that I know who would have been very, very capable of study. Emmanuel Macron saw some French news recently. His new government faces no confidence votes less than 12 hours after it was unveiled. The problem, it seems, is that he's opted for a sort of centre-right cabinet, Jack, when the left wing said, well, hang on just a minute. We provided a majority here. What's going on there?
Yeah.
And the French, we know, if there's a blue, they'll be out in the street setting fire to cars.
Yeah, as it will be. It'll be picking up cobblestones on the streets of Paris again.
Yeah, it looks like that. And look, yeah. And so I actually feel for the left in France here, because it's really dumb politics from Macron. He could have created a cabinet that was far more representative of what French voters had basically communicated to him in the recent elections. Meanwhile, over in Germany, Jack, Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats have narrowly defeated the far-right AfD, Alternative for Germany, in the eastern German state of Brandenburg. So a victory. Scholz's centre-left SPD won 30.9% of the vote, while the AfD scored 29.2%. That's nearly 60% between them. A good result for the centre-left, but it just tells us that this rather problematic group, the AfD, here to stay and are garnering more and more support as they go.
Yeah, they're no longer a fringe group. They're a serious part of German politics, I think.
It's very, very concerning. Very concerning. All right. We've got a fair bit to cover in sport today, Jack. AFL Grand Final week. Sydney play Brisbane Lions. Not a Melbourne team to be found running around. As a person who went to Melbourne, I found that was hosting in the preliminary finals, were hosting Geelong v the Brisbane Lions, of course. And the airfares weren't too bad, but the hotel accommodation, very, very cheap for this time of year.
A couple of days ago, it was cheaper to book a flight from Brisbane to Europe than from Brisbane to Melbourne.
I know. I've seen that. Look, I know Qantas and Virgin have put on extra flights and so forth, but we're talking about $1,400 one way.
Yes.
And I guess it's what some of the Oasis fans have found out when they bought tickets. This is what we call dynamic pricing, Jack, driven by demand. And it seems to be, completely wrong for mine. The other thing I would also say about the AFL Grand Final is it doesn't allow for many supporters of the two participant clubs to attend. It's really a huge corporate day.
Yes, you generally find the atmosphere's better at the preliminary finals.
Yeah, they're the last of the club days.
Yeah, because that's a club event, really. But Grand Final day, there are a lot of corporate people, a lot of people who just like going every time, and their team won't be playing. So there aren't enough tickets available for the competing teams.
Something like 10,000 seats put aside for AFL commitments. So these are just VIPs, basically, aren't they? So, yes, the AFL Grand Final has changed dramatically since its days when you would have seen your first few, and since I saw my first few, where it was a big supporters' day. It's not really that anymore.
65, I saw my first one.
My first was 72.
Mind you, I can't knock the people who are there when their team is not playing. I went to a hell of a lot of them in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, look.
And 90s.
The last grand final I saw long was 1993. Essendon. Have seen, yes, a lot of grand finals where Carlton have not played it.
My son who works for the Sydney Swans, our son works for the Swans.
So you got a ticket?
He's because he works there, they take them all down, all the staff down. Right. And he's going, and his form line for seeing grand finals live is very sound. He's been once. He was there in 2005. So one visit for one win.
One for one.
Yeah.
Might be due for a loss, Jack.
Yeah, he could be.
Well, who wins?
Well, I think I saw the Swans odds were $1.70, and I thought that was skinny. It should be $1.90 each. I mean, I think it's 50-50. And for this reason, I think Brisbane is the most talented team in the competition, but they can be a bit flaky, and they've had a harder road to get to the grand final. That makes it, I think, about 50-50.
They known as very good starters, and Sydney, of course, are known as very poor starters. I mean, Sydney have dominated the competition all year, with the exception of a few rounds where they were off. I mean, I think they got belted in South Australia to the tune
by Port, yes,
100 odd points. But with the exception of, I think, sort of a 2 or 3 game run, they've been the best side in the competition all year. Brisbane probably the best side in the competition for the last half of the season. My view is, and I was telling the many Sydney Swans supporters with last night, my view is that if Sydney start well thereabouts at quarter time, I think they'll win it. In terms of talent, there's not a lot of difference there. You know, around the mids, for example, make the argument that Sydney have got slightly better midfield, but Brisbane's very good. Brisbane's very good too. One thing I would say is that they really need to sit on Dwayne Zorko, who plays that sort of halfback, quarterback role, and is often given too much space. And if he's given too much space, he can really have a big impact on the game. So they need to probably tag him.
He's a much better player than he was 5 years ago. I mean, he's one of those rare blokes who's gotten better and better the longer he goes.
Different role from what he used to have, but he's now their kind of set-up player from the half-back line. I think they probably need to see someone stand on him, stand next to him. Stay there.
Did you, in the same way that all through the finals, someone stood on Nick Blakey as well? You need to do that.
Yeah, that's right.
Otherwise, they'll carve you up. Did you watch the Brisbane-Sydney game at the Gabba from a few weeks ago, from a few rounds ago?
Sydney game came very close at the Gabba, didn't they?
But it was just such a good game. At the finish of the game, I thought, well, could have gone either way, but really that was good enough to be a grand final. It was that quality.
That's at the Gabba, and it is a place where very first started. Carlton beat them at home, then Collingwood beat them, and I think they had 3 losses at home in a row, but they've straightened that up. So Fortress Gabba is still there. I just think if Sydney start well, that should hold them in pretty stead. And what we hope for, of course, is just a really good game. You mentioned that as one of the best games of the year. The game between Sydney and the Giants, what would have been a qualifying final, that was the best game of the season for mine.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
a ripping game. The Giants are a good side.
The Sydney-Brisbane one was the best one I'd seen to that point, and I think the Sydney-Giants game was a ripper.
Yeah, that was easily it. Meanwhile, in the NRL, it's their preliminary final week. So, who have we got there? We've got the Storm playing the Roosters, and Sharks playing Panthers on the Saturday. You would expect, just on results, that it would be a Melbourne Panthers grand final.
That's what I'm expecting, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what everyone's expecting. The Sharkies and the Roosters, it'll probably be their last game. They both did very well last week, and I thought both of them were vulnerable to be beaten by, shall we say, lesser sides on the ladder, but got the job done. And so we might have a boil over, but it would look to me like Melbourne will play Penrith next week in the grand final. And in cricket, Jack, well, we've got the Indians coming. Pretty impressive results in the ODI. I think we're 2-1 up in the best of four, in the 5-game series against England. The first 2 games, very comprehensive wins. England is a very young side now, very young ODI side, captained by Harry Brook, who's 24 years of age. Got 100 in their Duckworth-Lewis win in the 3rd game, and also it probably announces Travis Head is probably one of the best all-round cricketers, or all-level cricketers in the competition at the moment, and basically as a hard-hitting batsman. But tell me, who's going to open for Australia?
That's what I was going to ask
the
you.
Indians come.
Do you see the Australian team as being pretty much the same as the last one, or is it time to make some changes?
Well, I don't think Smith can open. I just don't think. I mean, I'm sure it might work for him from time to time. He'll be facing a very good attack. Bumrah, Siraj, with the new ball. These are quality bowlers. I just, with these very eccentric ways that Smith bats, I just can't see how he should be batting number 1 or 2. We need to find someone who's aggressive. So I'd certainly bat him at 4, return him to 4, Marnus at 3. And
what about Head, Travis Head?
Well, Travis Head is the one who should be coming in at 5. I would actually, and I know this might sound controversial, I would open Mitch Marsh with Uzi. I think you've got that. I mean, Marsh hits the ball harder than I reckon anybody in world cricket. So you've got a guy who can score quickly. With Uzi, who's the one who blunts attacks with defence. That's the way I would go with it. It's expecting a lot of Mitch Marsh, but the role of being an opener is you just get knocked over by a good ball, and you can get knocked over, and that's you done for you've been knocked over for 0 or 2 or 4, and allow him to do that for the whole series. I think Mitch Marsh should be an excellent contributor up there, and that way you can play the sort of 2 all-rounders around Cameron Green, and you're really not missing much in the batting. So let me just remind you, it's 1 Marsh, 2 Khawaja, 3 Marnus, 4 Smith, 5 Head, 6 Green, 7 Carey, and then the bowlers. That looks pretty good. That's a pretty good 11 for mine. But they will be coming up against a side who are just full of superstars.
Are we running into a problem with, this was put to me by an English friend, that our great bowling group, if you keep them all together,
they're going to go.
What happens when they all go together? We've got nothing left.
I don't think they will all go together, but it's very likely that, let's say, Stark and Hazelwood leave cricket at roughly the same time. I don't think Cummins is going to leave just at the minute. But, yes, you've got the same sort of problem that England have now, who had the 2 wonderful bowlers, took about 1,200 wickets between them, and now you have to find the replacements. The good news is Australian fast bowling stocks are in pretty good shape. So, yeah, it sort of comes down to, for this season, I don't think you can mess around with it too much, provided everyone stays fit. You've got Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins and Lyon. Yeah, that's the other thing too, Jack. Nathan Lyon can't play forever.
That's right.
And so, but again, our spin bowling stocks are pretty good too. All right, well, that takes us out. We were ripping through the show there. We even overlooked Mr. Chris Mitchell's op-ed, Jack. How terrible of us! How terrible of me to do that. But take us out with something that caught your eye during the week?
Well, this is from Brazil, from Sao Paulo. It was a televised debate for the mayoralty of Sao Paulo. And you know how things can
One
get
of the most populous cities in the world, isn't it Sao Paulo?
It is. And there was a bit of backwards and forwards, and one of the candidates picked up a chair and belted the trucks out of his opponents. It just sort of I like vigorous debate, but I think that's perhaps going
over the top. This would be Mr. Marcel, 37, a millennial life coach.
Yes.
Look, might be your research project for next week, Jack, is to find out what a millennial life coach does, because he's an influencer with 14 million Instagram followers, and he's got a sort of professional wrestler's ability to entertain, shall we say. So, and he has reached for the chair and whacked his opponent, who's a TV presenter.
Yeah,
Jose Luis Datina. So we are talking about a bit of cabaret here anyway, aren't we, Jack?
We're
67, by the way. 30 years difference.
Yeah.
And sudden outburst of violence shocked Brazil and left Mr. Markel in hospital. Oh, so the influencer, the millennial life coach, got whacked.
Yes. Yeah, it was the old bloke who hit him.
Old bloke has hit him. Oh, okay, I misunderstood that. Mr. Markel is in hospital with a broken rib and a dislocated finger. Gee, who's going to win that mayoralty result, Jack? What do the voters go for? Do they go for the bloke who grabs a chair and goes bananas, or do they go for the bloke who's passive and well-mannered?
Yeah, I don't know.
We'll have to find out.
It's a big and wild city, I'm told. So.
Yes, I'm told, yes. So we'll keep an eye on that. Let us know who wins that, Jack. Make a little mental note that we need to find out whether the chair-swinging Mr. Datina, 67, won, or Mr. Markel, the millennial life coach, has got the chocolate. So we'll let you know about that next week, listeners.
This morning I saw Keir Starmer do a train wreck of an interview, and seriously, he would have been better off picking up the chair and belting the questioner.
Yeah, it might be the go-to move for a few of them. If they're in trouble, just grab the chair, go the WWE stuff. All right, terrific contribution from you today, Jack. And look, we did have. I just want to have a quick look at this, Jack. I'm sort of throwing this on you without any warning, but we have heard from Baseman, a beloved listener, Ray, who has a welcome back, Jack. He's that's a reference to me being overseas, of course. And he said this, Jack: whenever we are discussing the USA election, remember this: Harris may defeat the orange one, but her biggest hurdle is trying to defeat the Electoral College. If Harris wins, many commentators believe it could lead to civil war. The Americans have a strange version of democracy hindered by an Electoral College gerrymander. I'm not sure about that, Ray. That would even make Joe Peterson flush. I'm not sure about that either. There are certainly gerrymanders in some of the congressional districts. But anyway, coupled with this are the voter suppression tricks that result in people of colour and the underprivileged having to jump through a variety of hoops to get the chance to vote. At the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton won 2.9 million votes more than Trump, but still lost. At the 2020 election, Biden won 7 million more votes than Trump, but if just 40,000 more votes had fallen in the right states, Trump would have won. I guess democracy is how you view it, old mate. So that's what Reyes had to say. Would you like to comment on that, Jack?
Well, it's going to be interesting to find out, isn't it?
Well, what we have is not so much a gerrymander. I mean, the Democrats win the popular vote because they win California, New York, Massachusetts, big population states, with
and they win them by
overwhelming numbers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so that's why you get this imbalance in the popular vote. But it all comes down to you got to win 270 to 538. Yeah, you got to win 270.
Yeah. In 2016, Hillary Clinton's margin in the popular vote was the same as her margin in California, I think, from memory.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what you often do see. So, well, we love you, Ray, and thank you for your letter.
And you're right about the congressional districting, as they call it there. There is some very creative map
stuff there. Both sides, by the way.
Yes.
But you can look at some Republican congressional districts, and they are, shall we say, very small number of voters.
Yeah. There is that's a problem right through. I think the American electoral system is that there is too much opportunity for politicians, for elected officials to do this. It doesn't work that way in Australia. Our Australian Electoral Commission does all that sort of stuff.
They're independent. I mean, look, one of the things that they might never happen is a federal election commission. Election commission that oversees and standardises voting requirements. And so in states like Oregon and Washington, there's automatic voter registration, like we have here.
Yes.
In other states, as Ray did suggest, you might have to drive a few miles to go to in somewhere like Kentucky, for example. You might have to drive a few miles to get to the voter registration place, and when you get there, it might be closed. So there is that sort of suppression stuff that goes on in the South a fair bit. But we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Ray, for your contribution, and we look forward to many more. And just a reminder to all our listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Any comments, criticisms, whatever you may have, and you can get hold of me on my Twitter account. My DMs are always open. And Jack, if you want to get hold of Hong Kong Jack, you can get hold of him on his Substack and just give it to us, Jack.
HongKongJack.substack.com.
There you go. That wraps us up for episode 88, and we look forward to bringing you 89 next week. Thanks, listeners. We'll see you then.